helping people cope with and overcome life's challenges. This is Life Transformations with Michael Hart, Canadian certified counselor and award-winning psychotherapist.
Thank you so much for joining us in this episode of the Life Transformation Show. Today's show is titled How to Avoid the Retirement Blues. And this is a continuation of last week's show. In last week's show, we looked at the topic, Joseph, the retired civil servant. And this was a very strange take because many of you do not think of Joseph as a retired civil servant. We think of him as Joseph, this young boy in the coat of many colors who is talking about his dreams. We think of him as the hard-working civil servant who is getting dreams from God, interpreting dreams of others, and rising to success in Egypt. But as a retired civil servant, we often do not get that picture. And we outlined very well how we came to this conclusion that Joseph was a retired civil servant. And if you missed last week's show, we covered that in very great detail, painting this picture of Joseph, a retired civil servant. But what we also said in last week's show is that not only was he retired, but he was a forgotten man. And we outlined the case for that using various scriptures in the book of Genesis, and we highlighted those scriptures with Exodus chapter 1 verse 8, where it says that there arose a Pharaoh in Egypt who knew not Joseph. And so Joseph, by the time of his death, was a retired civil servant who didn't have the accolades. No one remembered the great work that Joseph did, at least not in Egypt. Remember the great work of Joseph. He didn't have access to the pharaohs, and he didn't have the fame or the fortune that he once had as a working person. And so retirement can be a very hard time for a lot of people. We often think of retirement as being these sunshine years when we retire and we have the best of life. But researchers tell us that that's not the case. A study published in the Journal of Population and Aging found that people who were retired were 2 times more likely to suffer from symptoms of depression. As a matter of fact, the study went on to say that 25% of adults aged 65 or over have some type of mental health issue. And this little part about the 25% is actually from the Center of Disease Control and the Prevention. And that same research also said that suicide rates for men are highest among those age 75 and older. So it's quite the opposite of what we think. We think that the retirement years are these years of happiness, but for many people, it is not. And if you missed last week's show, I encourage you to listen to it on our YouTube channel by just searching in the topic, Joseph, the retired civil servant, because we looked at many of the reasons why people are depressed in retirement. And so in today's show, we are going to be doing a kind of a solution show to look at how to avoid those retirement blues. And so you might be thinking to yourself, I am not retired, I'm still a young person. Why should I listen to this show? Well, I will say to you that if you live long enough, one day you're going to be retired, and the advice that you're going to be getting, the tips that you're going to be getting from this show today can be very helpful for you in helping you to avoid retirement. And as I said before, we covered some of the reasons why people are depressed in retirement in last week's show. So it is important that you listen to that show as a foundation as well as listening to these tips as well. So when it comes to Joseph, we see that Joseph was a person who was not bitter in retirement, despite being a forgotten man, despite the fact that he had given his blood, sweat, and tears to helping Egypt overcome the years of famine and getting great wealth for Egypt, despite the fact that all that he did was forgotten in his later years, he was still not a bitter person. So how did Joseph avoid the retirement blues? And I'm going to be looking at different aspects of Joseph's life from the book of Genesis to highlight the points that I'm going to be making today as about how to avoid the retirement blues. And these are points that you can apply to your life as well. The first point that we see, that I will cover today and that we see in the book of Genesis, is that Joseph was a person who was very much in touch with his emotions. If you are going to avoid depression and anxiety in your retirement years, it is important for you to get in touch with your emotions. In the book of Genesis, maybe I should ask this as a kind of trivia question before I say what I was about to say. If I were to ask you, how many times did Joseph weep in the book of Genesis, what would be your answer? Would you think 2 or 3 times or 4? What would be your answer? Well, Joseph actually wept 7 times in the book of Genesis. Joseph was very much in touch with his emotions. The first time he wept was when he saw his brothers for the first time after 20 years. And these brothers didn't yet recognize that it was Joseph. Joseph was in the attire of an Egyptian, and he probably spoke as an Egyptian. And the brothers didn't think that Joseph, that they were speaking with Joseph, but Joseph recognized them. And the Bible said that he turned away from them and wept. That's Genesis 42 verse 24. We see him weeping a second time when he saw his youngest brother Benjamin for the first time in 20 years. And he wept, maybe tears of joy, seeing Benjamin again. Joseph wept a third time in Genesis 45:2 when he revealed his true identity to his brothers. And I can just imagine that must have been a kind of weeping that comes from a lot of mixed emotions. Maybe there was this emotion of joy, revealing himself to his brothers, but there might have also been this sense of loss. I have lost 20 years of relationship with you because of this evil that you have done. And as a result, there may have been anger as well. So this weeping of Joseph, this third weeping of Joseph may have to do with a lot of mixed emotions. What are some of the things that have happened in your life that have given you mixed emotions? Maybe you may have mixed emotions over your children growing up and becoming successful, and you're happy that they're now grown and that they're on their own and they're independent. But you may also have a sense of loss, missing those years when you lived together as a family. Retirement years, the years of being an empty nester, can be very hard for retirement folks. And so it's important for you to get in touch with those mixed emotions. Do not just pass it off by saying, I am happy. Think about the things that may be there as well that you may be grieving even in the midst of your happiness. The fourth time that Joseph wept in the book of Genesis was when he met Benjamin and his brothers, and he identified himself. He showed his true identity. He revealed himself as their brother. And the Bible says that he fell on his brother's neck and he wept, and he fell on Benjamin's neck and he wept. So there is this crying fest that is happening where Joseph is just so much in touch with his brothers. But we see Joseph weeping a fifth time when he was reunited with his father in Genesis 46 verse 29. And this is the joy of reunion. But again, there may have been mixed emotions. I have missed out on 20 years of relationship with my father. And now I am reuniting with him for the first time in 20 years. Jacob wept a sixth time at the death of his father Jacob, Genesis 51. And we are told that Jacob fell on his father's face and wept over him and kissed him. And so for those of you men out there who are thinking that it's not masculine to weep, Joseph was a very masculine person, a very masculine male in charge of great territory and great assets and doing very well financially. But he was also a man who was in touch with his emotions. And we see him weeping a seventh time after his father's death, and his brothers feared that he would exact revenge upon them, and so they couldn't even face him. They sent a messenger to him to sort of get a pledge from him that he would not seek revenge against them. And when the messenger came to Joseph, we are told that Joseph wept. This is the tears of disappointment. After all I have done for my brothers, after forgiving them, after giving them positions in Egypt, they still believe I am out to get them. And so we have Joseph weeping these tears of disappointment. Have you wept for the disappointments in your life? Have you wept for the wrong impression that people have of you? Have you wept for the ways in which you may have been falsely accused in your place of business? This is the kind of tears that David wept when he wept the 7 times, the tears of disappointment. Joseph was in touch with many aspects of his emotion. He's grieving. He's crying tears of grief. He's crying tears of disappointment. He's crying tears of joy. He's very much in touch with his emotions. If you are going to avoid the retirement blues, it's important for you to get in touch with your emotions. And you might not weep. You might not be someone who cries easily, and you might not weep the way that Joseph did, but it's important for you to acknowledge the emotions that you are feeling. Begin to journal about the disappointments in your life. Begin to talk to others about the things that hurt, because the opposite of getting in touch with your emotions is to suppress your emotions. And when you suppress your emotions and pretend as if they are not there, they don't magically disappear. They're there, and they're causing stress, and they're affecting your immune system, and they're creating health problems in your body. So it's important to get in touch with those emotions and release them so you can have the flow of blessing and health that God has in store for you. And so the second part of the second point on how to avoid the retirement blues is to forgive others who have hurt you. We see that Joseph forgave his brothers. We see that Joseph forgave the people in Egypt that may have forgotten him. There is no hint of bitterness when you come to the final chapter of his life. Genesis chapter 50, we are reading about the final days of Joseph. And we are told that Joseph is not concerned about what's happening in the hierarchy of Egypt. He's more concerned about the plans of God and the future of the Israelites. He's not dwelling on the past in the sense that he is bitter and angry at people in Egypt or getting involved in politics to undermine the new Pharaoh. No, he's a contented man. He's a forgotten man, but he's a contented man because he had this capacity to forgive others. And maybe you're listening and you are retired, but you're still holding on to the bitterness of that promotion that you didn't get 20 years ago. Or maybe you're retired and you're still bitter that someone got that corner office that you deserved and you worked hard and you should have gotten. Or maybe you're just bitter and hurting because you were falsely accused of things that happened in the workplace long ago. If you're going to be healthy in retirement, it's important for you to let those things go and move towards forgiveness. Studies have found that the act of forgiveness can reap huge rewards for your health, lowering the risk of heart attack, improving cholesterol levels and sleep, reducing pain and blood pressure, reducing levels of anxiety, depression, and stress. Forgiveness is actually good for your health. The opposite is also true. Researchers Karen Schwartz, MD, director of the Mood Disorders Adult Consultation Clinic at the Johns Hopkins Hospital, said that chronic anger puts you into fight or flight mode, which results in numerous changes in heart rate, blood pressure, and immune system. These changes then increase the risk of depression, heart disease, and diabetes, among other conditions. Forgiveness, however, calms stress levels, leading to improved health.
Michael will be right back. You have been listening to the Life Transformation Show, where award-winning psychotherapist Michael Hart of Elim Counselling Services has been speaking on the topic, how to avoid the retirement blues. You can find out more about us at elimcounselingministry.com or by calling 1-877-204-2914, where you can also make a donation to this Christ-centered ministry. Your donations help us to stay on the air and to provide subsidized counseling to those who can't afford it. Back to Michael.
Is there someone that you need to forgive? Is there something that you need to let go of? If you carry these things with you into the rest of your life, you are going to be prone to having depression and even suicidal thoughts in retirement years. The studies also show that the older a person gets, the more there is a correlation between their health and the level of forgiveness that they exercise. So in other words, if you're holding on to bitterness and resentment, as you age, the impact of that on your health becomes more pronounced. So there may be some things that you need to begin to let go of. And the third point that I would like to cover in helping you to avoid the retirement blues is that you need to stay connected to your family. Joseph stayed connected to his family. We are told in Genesis 50, verse 22 and 23, that Joseph saw the third generation of Ephraim's children and also the children of Machir, son of Manasseh, and that these boys were placed at birth on Joseph's knee. In other words, Joseph wasn't busy trying to get into politics after retirement to fight for his rights, or so focused on his hurt that he suffered in the workplace that he neglected and avoided his sons and their children. Joseph was closely connected to his family. And I think this is a key issue in avoiding the retirement blues. What we know is that as you age, relationships become more and more important and more conducive to maintaining good health. Loneliness is a killer. People who are lonely die at much faster rate. And so it's no surprise that the research shows that the retirement years are years of depression and suicidality for a lot of people, because many people, in chasing their dream job or chasing their ambitions of becoming multimillionaires, are buying into this concept that if I just have more, I will be happy. In pursuit of all of that, they neglect their children, they neglect their wives and their husbands, and they end up in retirement with wealth, but they're broken and they're alone and they're unhappy. So it is important to stay connected to your family to avoid the retirement blues. There's a song called let me just look at the name of it here. The song is called Cats in the Cradle. And I think it's a very powerful song because it shows how what you sow comes back around. In the beginning of this song, there is this man who was just too busy for his son. And he's always making promises to do things with him, but just was too busy chasing his own career and his own dreams that he never had time for his son. And I'm just going to read a part of the verse here that the song talks about the man's retirement. I have long since retired. My sons moved away. I called him up just the other day. I said, I'd like to see you if you don't mind. He said, I'd love to, Dad, if I can find the time. You see, my new job's a hassle and the kids have the flu. But it's sure nice talking to you, Dad. It's been sure nice talking to you. And as I hung up the phone, it occurred to me he'd grown up just like me. My boy was just like me. And I think it's a very sad reality that many people, in pursuing their retirement dreams, neglect their children and end up alone in retirement. If you're going to be healthy in retirement, it's important for you to avoid neglecting your children. So what if you have neglected your children and you're now alone? Well, I'm saying it's not too late to begin to try to make amends. Maybe it might start with an apology of reaching out and apologizing for the relationships that you didn't build with them. If your children have moved away and they're far away from you, you can have the benefit of community by becoming a member of a church or a social group that can help you to stay connected to people. Loneliness in retirement is very devastating on your health, so it's important to stay connected. Joseph was connected in retirement. The fourth point in avoiding the retirement blues is to maintain a connection to your faith. As we read the last verses from Joseph in the book of Genesis, we see that he's talking about God, he's talking about faith, he's talking about the promises of God and that God will surely come to the aid of the Israelites. Joseph, in the pursuit of wealth and fame, never forgot his roots. There are many of us that in trying to climb the corporate ladder, we sacrifice our faith on the altar of success. And we end up in this place where life has no meaning because materialism can never satisfy your spiritual needs. Joseph maintained a connection with his faith, despite the fact that he was in a society whose gods were a lot different than his gods. Joseph never forgot his roots. He never forgot the nature of his God, and he stayed in contact with his belief. And there are many benefits. Studies now are showing that there are many benefits to having religion. One of the studies that I looked at says religion gives people something to believe in, provides a sense of structure, and typically offers a group of people to connect with that share similar belief. And it also says, the study also says that rituals of religion like the communion or singing on a Sunday morning helps people to cope with difficulties in life and provide structure, regularity, and predictability. So if you have stepped outside of your faith, it is important for you to get hold of your faith, because materialism will never suffice. The way to avoid the retirement blues is to deepen your faith, become more regular in your attendance at church, and study and become more knowledgeable about the things pertaining to your faith. So we see that Joseph had this sense of faith. And the next point of the fifth point in how to avoid the retirement blue is that you need to develop a sense of purpose that's bigger than yourself. Joseph was dying, but his focus was not on himself. His focus was on what's going to happen to his people after his death. And so Joseph in Genesis 50:24 Joseph says, I am about to die, but God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of this land to the land he promised an oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So Joseph has a purpose that's much bigger than the present. His purpose extends to the past of his forefathers and extend into the future with his children's children. And he's saying, the God of my forefathers is going to come to your aid. If you are going to avoid the retirement blues, it cannot be about materialism. It cannot be the focus that is totally self-absorbed and narcissistic in its scope. Your sense of purpose has to be on something that's bigger than you. Many of us find that thing in our faith, in the purpose that we have in life for serving others, volunteering for organizations that feed the poor, organizations that provide mental health at subsidized costs. Many of us can give back of our knowledge that we earned during our working years to these kinds of organizations instead of being absorbed with only materialism and our pursuit to have a retirement life that's built around materialism. There's much more that I could say on this point, but we're quickly run out of time. So I want to thank you for joining us in this episode of the Life Transformation Show. We've covered these 5 points on how to avoid the retirement blues. If you missed the first part of this show, you can listen to it by going to our YouTube channel, Elim Counselling Services on YouTube. And Elim is spelled E-L-I-M, counseling with 2 L's, ministry.com. You can also get in touch with us by going to our website using those same name, Elim Counseling Services. So until next time, I want to pray that God would bless you in all your relationships and to keep you sound in mind and pure in heart.